The hospital hallway stretched endlessly under the cold fluorescent lights, each bulb humming a mechanical prayer for the dying. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth door, a man who once thought himself invincible now struggled to draw breath through an oxygen mask. His chest rose and fell with the desperation of a drowning man, each gasp a reminder that all the money in the world couldn't buy him one more lungful of air. The young doctor standing beside his bed wore a white coat that seemed too heavy for his shoulders, and in his calm eyes, a storm gathered, silent, patient, terrible. He once laughed at love, mocked mercy, and abandoned his unborn child. But today, that same child holds his very life in his hands. Before we go any further, can I ask you for one small favor? This story took me days to write, record, and edit, every frame, every emotion, every sound. It costs you nothing to support me, but it truly means everything. Please, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and comment your location below. I want to know where my amazing viewers are watching from. I read every single comment, and I'll be giving shout-outs in my next video. Today's shout-out goes to Victor Matthew from Florida, Eunice from Soweto, Sarah from Cameroon and Lorna from New York. Now back to our story. The city of Lagos never sleeps, and neither did its princes. Stephen Jacob Kalu was one of them, a man who moved through the world like he owned it, because in many ways he did. His black SUVs carved through traffic with the arrogance of power, their tinted windows hiding a man who believed himself untouchable. Private jets carried him across continents like a god surveying his domain. Champagne flowed at his parties like rain in the monsoon season, and men twice his age bowed before him, their pride swallowed by the weight of his wealth. He stood before his bedroom mirror one morning, adjusting a watch that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and laughed at his own reflection. What is family when I have power? What is love when I can buy anything I desire? The mirror showed him everything he wanted to see, a young billionaire, handsome, untouchable, free. It didn't show him the emptiness behind his eyes, the hollow space where his soul should have been. It didn't warn him that no matter how high the bird flies, one day it must come down to drink water. But far from the steel and glass towers of Lagos, in a village where the earth still remembered the footsteps of ancestors, a different kind of wealth was being cultivated. The sun rose over thatched roofs and painted the morning in shades of gold and amber. Grace moved through this dawn like a prayer, her feet knowing every stone on the path to the village well. The weight of the clay pot on her head had taught her balance, just as her mother's wisdom had taught her grace. The elders greeted her by name as she passed, their aged faces creasing with smiles. She stopped to help an old woman whose basket had spilled, gathering the scattered yams with patient hands. In the evening, she knelt beside her parents as they prayed, their voices rising and falling in rhythms older than memory. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder afterward, warm and certain. My daughter, never let wealth blind you. Love without truth brings sorrow, and pleasure without commitment brings only tears. Remember this, even when the world tries to teach you otherwise. Grace promised, her voice clear and certain. How could she know that promises made in innocence are the easiest to break? How could she know that a storm was already gathering on the horizon, wearing an expensive suit and driving toward her village in a convoy of black cars? Stephen arrived like a king inspecting his territory. The government had awarded his construction company the contract to build a new school and medical center. Vanity projects that would bear brass plaques with politicians' names while his bank account swelled with the real reward. He drove through the village slowly, windows down, surveying the landscape with the detached interest of a tourist. And then he saw her. Grace carried a bucket of water on her head, moving with a fluidity that made the burden seem weightless. The late afternoon sun caught her face at an angle that seemed almost divine, and for a moment, Stephen forgot how to breathe. Not because his heart had found something beautiful, but because his ego had found something unconquered. Hello, beautiful. His voice carried across the dusty road, smooth as silk, sharp as a blade. Grace didn't turn. She didn't acknowledge. She simply continued walking, her spine straight, her dignity intact. The bucket didn't even wobble. Stephen felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest, rejection. No one rejected him. No one walked away when he called. The feeling burned, not like shame, but like challenge. He watched her disappear around a bend in the road and made a decision that would destroy 2 lives and, years later, redeem one. The next day, he blocked her path. Not aggressively, but deliberately, his car rolling to a gentle stop just ahead of her on the narrow road. He stepped out, all charm and softness now, wearing humility like a costume. I apologize for yesterday. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I'm Stephen. I'm here working on the new school project. You are. Grace hesitated. Her mother had warned her about men who spoke too sweetly, but he seemed genuinely apologetic. His eyes held hers with an intensity that felt like attention, like being seen for the first time. She didn't know yet that predators make their prey feel special before the kill. Grace. Just Grace. Not Grace something beautiful. Grace something wonderful. She almost smiled. Almost. Just Grace. Over the following weeks, he pursued her with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to business deals. He appeared at the village square when she came to buy tomatoes. He donated money to her church, sitting beside her during service. He spoke of marriage, of taking her to Lagos, of giving her a life beyond the dust and poverty of the village. And slowly, like water wearing down stone, he eroded her defenses. The evening he invited her to his quarters, a luxury container home the company had set up at the construction site. He spoke of celebrating their future together. Just a toast, he said. Just juice and conversation, he promised. She trusted him. That was her first mistake. Her last mistake was drinking what he offered. The soft music playing from his phone seemed to grow louder and then distant, as if she were falling down a well. The room tilted. Her limbs felt heavy as wet sand. She tried to speak, but her tongue had forgotten how to form words. The last thing she remembered was his face above hers, no longer charming, no longer soft, wearing an expression of satisfaction that had nothing to do with love. When she woke, the sun was setting through the window, painting everything the color of blood and warning. Her body ached with violations she couldn't name but felt in every cell. Her clothes lay scattered like evidence. Stephen stood by the door, fully dressed, checking his watch. What have you done to me, Stephen? Her voice barely rose above a whisper, broken and trembling. He placed an envelope on the table, thick with cash, heavy with contempt. Use this to take care of yourself. I'm returning to Lagos tomorrow. The project is almost finished. The door closed behind him with a finality that sounded like a grave being sealed. Grace lay there as darkness filled the room, as silent tears carved rivers down her cheeks, as the wind moved through the curtains like a ghost bearing witness. The piano of her soul played a song of sorrow that would echo for years. 6 weeks later, her hands shook as she held the pregnancy test, watching the double lines appear like a sentence being handed down. 6 weeks after that, her father's rage shook the very walls of their small home. You have disgraced this family. You have brought shame upon the name our ancestors gave us. You have 2 market days to remove this curse, or you will leave this house forever. Her mother wept but said nothing. In their culture, a father's word was law, and a daughter's shame was the family's burden. Grace packed a small bag with clothes that still smelled like her mother's cooking, like home, like everything she was about to lose. The journey to Lagos took 8 hours in a crowded bus that smelled of sweat and diesel and despair. She had memorized Stephen's company address from the business card he'd left, had rehearsed what she would say 1,000 times. Surely when he saw her, when he understood, he would do the right thing. Surely the man who had spoken of marriage hadn't been lying about everything. The security guard at his company gate looked at her like she was trash blown in by the wind. No, you cannot see Mr. Kalu. No, he doesn't take visitors. No, I don't care if you're carrying his child. Do you know how many women come here with that story? Leave before I call the police. The gate slammed shut with a metallic clang that sounded like hope dying. Grace stood there as rain began to fall, as the sky opened up and wept with her, as Lagos swallowed her whole. Even he has rejected me. Even he wants nothing to do with his own blood. Night found her huddled under the awning of a closed shop, her arms wrapped around her stomach, whispering promises to the life growing inside her. I will protect you. I will love you. I will never abandon you the way he abandoned us both. The old woman found her just before midnight, Mama Beezy, who sold food from a wooden stall during the day and opened her heart to broken things at night. She had seen enough suffering in her 70 years to recognize it on sight. My daughter, come with me. You cannot sleep here tonight. The streets of Lagos eat girls like you alive. The small room behind Mama Beezy's food stall smelled like palm oil and mercy. A thin mattress on the floor became Grace's bed. A lantern in the corner became her son. And Mama Beezy became the mother her shame had stolen from her. The months passed like a slow tide, each day bringing Grace's body closer to the moment of reckoning. She helped Mama Beezy cook, stirring massive pots of jollof rice, frying plantains until they turned golden, serving customers with a smile that hid an ocean of pain. Her belly grew, and with it, a strange kind of peace. This child didn't ask to be created through betrayal, didn't deserve to inherit shame. This child was innocent, and she would move heaven and earth to give him a chance. The labor pains began at midnight, sharp and relentless as divine judgment. Mama Beezy flagged down a taxi, held Grace's hand in the back seat as they raced through empty Lagos roads, praying in Yoruba while Grace screamed in pain. The hospital lights were too bright, the nurses too rushed, everything too fast and too slow at once. And then, like dawn breaking after the longest night, a cry filled the room, thin and strong and absolutely perfect. The nurse placed the baby on Grace's chest, his tiny fists waving at the injustice of being born, his eyes squeezed shut against the harsh world he'd entered. Grace touched his face with trembling fingers, traced the curve of his cheek, counted his fingers twice to make sure they were all there. His name is Daniel. For God has judged and shown mercy. For God has heard my prayer and remembered me. Mama Beezy danced around the hospital bed, her old body suddenly young with joy, praising God in 3 languages and inventing a 4th. The nurses smiled despite themselves. Even in a place that saw death every day, birth still felt like victory, like hope refusing to surrender. Years moved like water, each one washing away a little more of the pain while depositing something stronger in its place. Daniel grew up in the shadow of Mama Beezy's food stall, learning to count by sorting coins, learning compassion by watching his mother feed customers who couldn't pay. He was 8 years old when he started asking the question Grace had always dreaded. Mama, do I have a father? She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, smoothed his hair with hands that had never stopped being gentle. One day you'll understand. One day, when you're older, I'll tell you everything. But for now, know that you are loved completely, perfectly, forever. He seemed to accept this, the way children accept mysteries they're too young to solve. Instead, he poured his questions into books, his hurts into dreams of healing. He studied under the yellow glow of Mama Beezy's lantern, reading second-hand textbooks until the pages fell apart. He watched doctors on an old television Mama Beezy had rescued from the roadside, their white coats seeming to glow with purpose. I want to be a doctor, Mama. I want to heal people. I want to fix what's broken. Grace watched him with pride and sadness braided together like rope. He was brilliant, her son. He saw the world with eyes that looked past surfaces to the suffering underneath. He carried none of his father's cruelty, had inherited only his mother's capacity for hope. When he was 16, a missionary scholarship opened a door that had seemed forever locked. Medical school. A real chance. A future that wasn't defined by his beginning. The time-skip montage of his life would make angels weep. Daniel hunched over textbooks at 3 in the morning, coffee going cold beside him. Daniel in a borrowed suit at his university graduation, searching the crowd for his mother's face. Daniel receiving his white coat, his hand shaking as the dean placed it on his shoulders, his eyes finding Grace in the audience, her face wet with tears, her hands clasped in gratitude. The forgotten child had become a healer. The abandoned son had found his purpose. But life is a circle, and circles always close. While Daniel rose, his father fell. Stephen Jacob Kalu's kidneys began to fail slowly, then suddenly. The same body that had felt invincible at 30 now betrayed him at 45. His wife, a woman who had married his money, not his soul, packed her designer bags the day his accounts were frozen for medical expenses. She left without a note, without a backward glance, taking the jewelry but leaving the sickness behind. He lay in a private hospital room that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. And still, he was dying. All the money that remained couldn't buy him what he needed: a matching kidney, a second chance, a mercy he'd never shown to anyone else. The irony was so perfect it seemed choreographed by God. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly under those same cold fluorescent lights. Dr. Daniel Grace walked it with the confidence of someone who had earned his place, his white coat marking him as someone who saved lives rather than destroyed them. He picked up the new patient file, scanning it with professional efficiency. Name: Stephen Jacob Kalu. Age: 45. Diagnosis: end-stage renal failure. Prognosis: critical. Needs transplant within weeks. Daniel froze. The file trembled in his hands. That name that had lived in his imagination for 25 years, the shadow father who had never earned a face, the ghost who had chosen money over mercy. He entered the ward slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The man in the bed looked nothing like the billionaire from his mother's scattered stories. This man was frail, his skin gray with toxins his body could no longer filter, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. But there was something in the shape of his face, the line of his jaw, that made Daniel's breath catch. "You remind me of someone." The voice was weak but still carried traces of authority, of a man used to being obeyed. "What's your name, doctor?" "Dr. Daniel Grace." The silence that followed felt alive, dangerous. Stephen's eyes widened slowly, recognition dawning like a terrible sunrise. Grace. That name. That face. Oh God, that face. It was like looking in a mirror that showed him not who he was, but who he had destroyed. Before either could speak again, the door opened. Grace entered, her hair now touched with gray, her face lined with years of struggle and survival, but her spine still straight, her dignity still intact. She'd come because Mama Beezy had fallen ill, and this was the hospital where her son worked. She hadn't expected to see this file on his desk. Hadn't expected to see that name that still made her hands shake. Stephen. Her voice cut through the room like a knife through old wounds. Grace. His whisper was disbelief wrapped in regret. Daniel stood between them, a bridge built from betrayal, watching as 25 years of silence exploded into sound. "Look at you now." Grace's fury erupted like a volcano that had been dormant too long. "The man who thought money could buy everything. The man who threw cash at me like I was a problem to be solved. Where are your SUVs now, Stephen? Where are the men bowing before you? Where is the power you worshipped?" Her words landed like blows. Daniel had never seen his mother like this, her composure shattered, her pain laid bare, her anger finally given permission to breathe. She turned and ran from the room, her footsteps echoing down the corridor like drumbeats of judgment. Daniel stood there, torn between the oath he'd taken to save lives and the son he'd always been to a woman who'd sacrificed everything. The man in the bed was dying. The man in the bed was his father. The man in the bed had abandoned them both without a second thought. He went home to find his mother sitting in the darkness of their small apartment, upgraded from Mama Beezy's stall but still humble, still honest, still filled with love instead of luxury. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Mom." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Mom, if we let him die, we become what he was. We become the people who turn away from suffering. We become the ones who choose money over mercy. You'll share your life with the man who gave us none." Her voice broke, shattered into pieces. "You'll cut yourself open, give him a part of you, and for what? So he can live a few more years? So he can die with a clear conscience while we carry the scars? It's not for him, Mom." Daniel's voice was soft but certain, carrying the weight of someone who had thought this through 1,000 times in the hours since he'd read that name. It's for who I am. It's for who you raised me to be. You taught me that love is not a feeling, it's a choice. You taught me that mercy is not earned, it's given. If I turn away from him now, everything you sacrificed to make me a good man was for nothing. She pulled him into her arms, this son who had become her entire world, who had turned her greatest shame into her greatest pride. They cried together in that small apartment, holding each other as the weight of forgiveness pressed down on them like gravity itself. The tests confirmed what Daniel had already suspected. He was a perfect match. His kidney, his blood, his body could save the man who'd never wanted him to exist. Mama Beezy held Grace's hand in the chapel while they waited, praying in that language she'd invented the night Daniel was born, asking God to protect the boy who had protected them both. The surgery took 6 hours. 6 hours of monitors beeping, of skilled hands moving with practiced precision, of one life being divided to save another. Daniel lay on one table, his side open to give what couldn't be asked. Stephen lay on another, receiving a gift he'd never deserved. In the recovery room, Stephen woke slowly, his vision blurred, his body heavy with drugs and gratitude. He turned his head and saw them. Grace standing by the window, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Daniel in the bed beside him, still groggy, still weak, but alive. Still merciful. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, counting heartbeats like prayers, measuring breaths like second chances. Stephen's hand moved toward his side, feeling the bandage, the ache, the gift he didn't deserve. His mouth was dry, his throat raw, but the words had to come out. They had been trapped inside him for 25 years, growing heavier with each passing day, and now they fell from his lips like stones, heavy and inadequate. Forgive me. The words hung in the air between them, too small for the damage they were meant to repair. Grace didn't move from the window. Daniel's eyes flickered open, meeting his father's gaze with something that wasn't quite forgiveness but wasn't quite condemnation either. Forgive me, I was a monster. I was blind. I worshipped everything that doesn't matter and destroyed everything that does. I thought power was having people bow before me, but real power was in that village girl I threw away. Real wealth was in the son I never met. I've been poor my entire life and didn't know it until now. His voice broke, and the machines registered the surge of emotion, beeping faster, alarmed by the distress of a heart that had finally learned to feel. A nurse came in, checked the monitors, gave Stephen a warning look that said rest, not confession. But some confessions can't wait. Some apologies have expiration dates, and Stephen could feel his ticking down with every labored breath. Grace turned from the window slowly, her silhouette framed by the Lego skyline beyond, all those buildings reaching toward heaven while the people below still crawled through hell. She studied the man in the bed, this stranger who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Now he looked like what he'd always been, just a man. Fragile. Mortal. Afraid. His lawyer arrived the next day with documents, a foundation established in their names, funded by what remained of Stephen's wealth. Its mission, to support single mothers and provide medical care for sick children. The brass plaque would read Grace and Daniel Mercy Foundation, and every person it helped would be a prayer of repentance for the people Stephen had failed to love. But it was the handwritten letter attached to the documents that made Grace's hands tremble. Stephen's shaky script covered 3 pages, detailing every regret, every moment he'd replayed in his mind during the long nights when his failing kidneys had forced him to confront his mortality. He wrote about the nightmares where he saw her face, young and trusting, looking at him with hope that he'd poisoned. He wrote about the years he'd spent building an empire on sand, surrounding himself with people who loved his money but would abandon him the moment it ran dry. He wrote about the day he'd turned her away from his gate, how he'd watched from his office window as she stood in the rain, how he'd told himself she was lying, the baby wasn't his, because it was easier than being a man. The foundation was just money, he wrote. But money was all he had left to give, and maybe, just maybe, it could prevent another girl from sleeping on the streets, another child from growing up wondering why his father didn't want him. Grace read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. She folded it carefully and placed it in her bag, next to the business card he'd given her 25 years ago, the one she'd kept all this time, not as a memento of love, but as evidence that the devil sometimes wears a charming smile. She approached his bed slowly, each step a battle between justice and mercy. Her feet remembered the long walk to his gate, the longer walk away from it. Her body remembered the shame, the rejection, the nights she'd cried until her throat was raw. Her heart remembered the girl she used to be, the innocence that could never be returned, the trust that had died in a dark room while soft music played and her world ended. She looked at this man who had broken her, who had abandoned her, who had taught her that cruelty often wore a handsome face. And then she looked at her son, the man that broken girl had raised, the healer that abandonment had created, the proof that God could write straight with crooked lines. Daniel was sitting up now, pale but steady, his hand pressed to his side where they'd taken part of him to save the whole of someone else. He met his mother's eyes and nodded slightly, giving her permission to do what she needed to do, whatever that might be. We forgive, not because you deserve it, but because we need peace. Grace's voice was quiet but firm, each word carefully chosen, each syllable weighted with years of pain transformed into purpose. We forgive because hate is too heavy to carry, and we've been carrying it long enough. We forgive because my son taught me that mercy is stronger than memory, that redemption is possible even when it seems impossible. We forgive because unforgiveness would make us prisoners in a cell where you're already serving your sentence. She paused, her hand resting on the rail of his bed, close but not touching. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't make the past 25 years disappear. It just means we're choosing to let God handle your judgment while we focus on our healing. It means we're walking away from this hospital lighter than we came in, while you'll carry your regrets to whatever comes next. Stephen wept. Grace didn't. She had no more tears to give him. She'd spent them all 25 years ago, had left them in that dark room where her innocence had died. But she had something more valuable than tears. She had survived. She had raised a son who chose compassion over vengeance. She had won in every way that mattered, in every way that would echo into eternity. Daniel reached out and took his mother's hand, and in that gesture, Stephen saw everything he'd lost. Not just a woman, not just a son, but the possibility of being part of something greater than himself. The foundation would carry their names, but he would never truly be family. He would be the donor, the benefactor, the cautionary tale, but never the father, never the husband, never the man who got to watch his son grow up and become extraordinary. The weeks that followed were strange and tender and painful all at once. Stephen recovered slowly, his new kidney functioning better than his old one ever had, his body healing faster than his conscience. He attended physical therapy in the mornings and sat alone in the afternoons, watching Daniel make rounds, seeing the way patients' faces lit up when he entered their rooms, witnessing the legacy of love that he'd almost destroyed before it could begin. Grace visited Mama Beezy every day, bringing her favorite foods, sitting beside her bed while the old woman's breathing grew shallower, her time on earth drawing to a close. On the day Mama Beezy died, Grace held her hand and whispered thank you in every language she knew, because some angels wear aprons instead of wings, and some saviors operate food stalls instead of churches. The village welcomed them home like prodigal children, though they'd never really left. They'd simply grown larger than its borders. Grace's parents, now bent with age and softened with regret, met her at the bus stop. Her father's hands shook as he reached for her, his face carved with canyons of remorse. No words were spoken. Some apologies are too big for language, too deep for vocabulary. Her father simply pulled her into his arms and whispered the Igbo prayer of blessing her grandmother had taught him as a child, the one that asked God to restore what the locusts had eaten, to rebuild what shame had destroyed. Her mother touched Daniel's face with trembling fingers, tracing the features that were both familiar and foreign. Her daughter's eyes, a stranger's jaw, a combination that told the whole story without needing explanation. My grandson, she whispered. My grandson, whom I cast out before he was born. Forgive an old woman who let fear overrule love. Daniel hugged her tightly, and in that embrace, 3 generations found their way back to each other. Daniel opened a clinic in the same village where his mother had once drawn water, where his father had once destroyed innocence. He named it Mama Beezy Care Center, honoring the woman who had taught him that family is not blood, it's who stays when the storms come. The sign above the door was painted bright yellow, the color of hope, the color of sunrise after the longest night, the color of the lantern that had lit his childhood studies. On opening day, the whole village came. Old women brought him plates of food they couldn't afford to spare. Young mothers carried sick babies, finally having somewhere to take them that wouldn't turn them away for lack of money. The chief gave a speech about how the village had sent away a daughter in shame and received back a healer in glory, how God had a way of turning their worst mistakes into his greatest miracles. Stephen came too, walking slowly, still weak, sitting in the back of the crowd where no one would notice him. He watched his son cut the ribbon, watched Grace stand beside him beaming with pride, watched the community celebrate the man he'd helped create but never helped raise. And for the first time in his life, Stephen understood what it meant to be truly poor. Not lacking money, but lacking connection, lacking legacy, lacking love that lasted beyond the grave. Money builds mansions, but only love builds people. Stephen abandoned his son, but that son gave him life, and gave the world hope. The billionaire learned that wealth is measured not in bank accounts but in the children who choose mercy over revenge, in the mothers who choose dignity over bitterness, in the strangers who choose kindness over comfort. He learned that power is not making people bow before you, but lifting them up when they've fallen. He learned that legacy is not what you leave in your will, but what you write in people's hearts. And somewhere in Lagos, in a small food stall that smelled like palm oil and grace, where Mama Beezy's daughter now kept the business running, a new lantern burned bright in the window. It was the same lantern that had lit Daniel's studies, the same one Grace had prayed beside on the darkest nights. And in its yellow glow, a new generation of struggling mothers found refuge, found meals they couldn't afford, found someone who asked no questions but gave anyway. The old woman named Mama Beezy was gone now, dancing in heaven like she had danced the night a crying baby entered the world. But her spirit lived on in every act of mercy, in every hand extended, in every stranger who became family. She was proof that even in our darkest moments, God is writing a story that will make the angels sing, that will turn wounds into wisdom, that will transform the abandoned into the extraordinary. If you were Daniel, would you have saved him? Would you have cut yourself open to heal the man who cut you out of his life? Drop your answer in the comments below.